Welcome to Hidden Front History. This is where we look for those moments of profound human choice that usually get lost in the big, sweeping narratives of war.
Exactly. We're not talking about battle plans or grand strategy today.
No, not at all. Today we're diving deep into a story that really gets into the human heart, right, where ideology crashes head-on with reality.
And our mission for this deep dive is really for you, the learner, because you brought us this incredible set of sources. They all detail this one powerful moral turning point from World War II.
Right. We're going to try and pull out the truth that's hiding under all these layers of propaganda and, frankly, of fear.
It's the story of how some of the simplest acts of decency, things we take for granted, absolutely shattered a totalitarian worldview.
Okay, so let's set the stage, and let's actually jump right to the climax of the story because it's just so shocking. The setting is Camp Concordia. It's in northern Kansas, November of 1944. Winter's coming on, and a young woman, Margaret, a 23-year-old German auxiliary POW, is running for her life, or rather for her friend's life.
Yeah, and she's driven by a terror that's much, much colder than the Kansas wind. She's just seen her best friend Elsa collapse in the laundry building.
And it's bad.
It's very bad. Elsa is showing all the classic deadly signs of a ruptured appendix, internal bleeding. Margaret knows from just the grim reality of wartime medicine and, crucially, from years of Nazi indoctrination, that Elsa is dying.
So she runs. She is sprinting across this muddy compound toward the nearest American guard post. She's frantic, hysterical even, and she's trying to find the words in broken English that will get her friend the only kind of mercy she believes these barbaric American enemies will offer.
And she reaches the guard post, she's gasping for air, and she blurts out this fragmented phrase, "Please, my friend, dying, shoot her, mercy, please."
Wow.
Think about that. She expected a gun. She truly believed that the only compassion an enemy would show a dying German prisoner, who is now a burden, was a quick, clean end. The propaganda had told them they'd be treated like wounded animals, and this is what you do for a wounded animal.
It's just an incredible image. A German woman trained to hate these people, begging an American soldier to execute her best friend because she's convinced that's the kindest thing he could possibly do.
But this is where the story, this hidden history, takes that sharp turn. The guard's reaction wasn't what she expected at all.
Right. He didn't confirm her fear.
No. And you can almost feel the cognitive dissonance he must have felt. He doesn't pull his pistol. He doesn't even really hesitate for that long.
Yeah, he acts.
He acts. He grabs his radio, and the alarm that sounds through Camp Concordia isn't for an attack. It's a medical alert. He just barks into the radio. Medical emergency laundry building need ambulance now.
So that's the question that's going to guide us through this entire deep dive, right? Why did Margaret, even after months of relatively comfortable captivity, immediately default to that core Nazi programming and expect a bullet? And why did the enemy, the one she was taught had no honor, respond by mobilizing everything to save her friend's life? This single moment defines their war in a way no battle ever could.
To really get that, to understand the depth of that demand for an execution, we have to rewind 3 months. Back to August 1944.
Okay. So let's go back.
Margaret and Elsa, they were friends from Bremen. They were two of the thousands of young women serving in the Wehrmacht auxiliaries.
Let's pause on that term auxiliaries. It sounds kind of soft, but the reality was much harder, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's a crucial point. These women weren't frontline soldiers with rifles, but they were deeply, deeply embedded in the German war machine.
Doing what exactly?
Things like communications, administration, some were even anti-aircraft assistance. The whole point was to free up men for combat. But what that really means is they were totally immersed in the Nazi information ecosystem. Their entire world was shaped by it.
So they didn't just hear the propaganda.
They lived it. It was part of their identity, their patriotic duty. So when they were captured together in France, their journey to America became the first real crack in that worldview.
They were put on cattle cars to be transported inland.
Yes. And you have to imagine the scene. These women, coming from a nation that had been so carefully shielded from the outside world's reality, are now pressed up against the slats of this transport car. And as they start rolling through the American heartland, they get their first glimpse, and it causes a complete cognitive breakdown.
What do they see?
The sources are so vivid here. Margaret presses her face to the bars, and she sees a world that that just shouldn't exist. It looked like a fairy tale.
White picket fences.
White picket fences, manicured lawns, kids playing outside, farmers just harvesting these endless fields of corn that stretched to the horizon, completely untouched.
No bomb craters.
No blackened ruins of cities, just normalcy, safety, and overwhelming impossible abundance.
And Elsa's reaction is just devastating.
It is. She's gripping the bars next to Margaret and she just whispers, how can they live like this while our cities burn? The whole Reich narrative was built on shared sacrifice, that the enemy was suffering too. And this visual proof, the sheer prosperity of America, just pulls the rug out from under the entire rationale for the war.
And this is all happening while they're terrified about what's coming next.
Exactly. This visual shock is compounding the terror that was drilled into them. The indoctrination was relentless.
What were the specifics? What did the Reich promise them would happen if they were captured by Americans?
It was pure psychological terrorism. They were told Americans were gangsters and criminals, that they had no honor, no culture. But for the women, it was even more specific. They were told they'd be treated like animals.
Humiliation, starvation.
Yeah. Rape, forced labor until they died. They were preparing themselves for the absolute worst kind of brutality you can imagine. It was designed to make them fight to the death.
So the train finally screeches to a halt at Camp Concordia, and they're bracing for chaos and cruelty.
And they get the opposite.
How so?
Well, the first thing is just the visual. Yes, there are guard towers and barbed wire. It's a prison, but it's orderly, it's clean, and maybe most unnerving, it's quiet. It looked nothing like the propaganda posters.
And then came the smell. The sources really linger on this detail.
Oh, they do. The air is dry and dusty, but mixed in it is this aroma that makes Margaret's stomach just clench with this immediate, painful hunger.
It's the smell of real meat cooking.
Rich, savory, fatty meat. Think about the physiological impact of that. For years, they've been surviving on what the Reich called sustenance. Watery gruel. This stuff called ersatz soup.
Let's break that down. Ersatz, it means substitute.
It means substitute. But this wasn't just low-quality food. This was filler. It was designed to take up space in your stomach without actually providing real nutrition. Soup made from potato peelings, synthetic fats.
And sawdust in the bread.
So to be hit with the smell of genuine, unprocessed animal protein, fat rendering, muscle cooking, it's like a physical blow. Her first thought is denial. It must be for the American guards.
But it wasn't just the meat.
No. That smell starts to mix with the smell of fresh bread, and not their heavy black bread. The sources say it was real bread, the kind with the light crust that crackled when you broke it. It was an impossible sensory reality.
The sounds were also wrong.
Completely wrong. No one was screaming orders. The American soldiers were just talking to each other casually. Someone was whistling a jazz tune. You know, music that was banned back home as degenerate noise.
So firm, but not cruel.
Exactly. Efficient, but not brutal. Out, line up, move. Everything was just normal. The sensory overload is just bombarding them with the contradictory information. Their programming screams brutality, but their eyes, ears, and nose are all reporting abundance and normalcy.
And that's when they get the official welcome.
Yes.
Wow.
A young American female officer, maybe 25, walks up to their group. Margaret notes that she doesn't have hate in her eyes. It's more like a distant professional sympathy.
And she speaks to them in German.
Careful, measured German. And she delivers the words they were absolutely certain had to be a monstrous lie. A trick. She says, "Welcome to Camp Concordia. You are prisoners of war and will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will receive food, shelter, medical care, and letter privileges."
Let's slow down on that, the Geneva Convention. Why would that statement, a promise of humane treatment, trigger more terror instead of relief?
Because for them, it was completely outside of their reality. The Axis powers, especially Germany on the Eastern Front, they'd notoriously disregarded the convention. Their own military practice starvation, forced labor, mass executions of prisoners.
So they just assumed the Allies would be just as lawless.
It's a classic projection. If we ignore the rules, they must ignore them too. For the Nazis, laws were a sign of weakness. So for the enemy to promise to follow the law was seen as either a sign of their inferiority or, more likely, a very clever trap.
The trick?
A trick. Elsa whispers it. The monster is just lulling them into a false sense of security before the real horror begins. They just stand there, trembling, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
So the processing continues, and these contradictions just keep piling up. It wasn't enough for the Americans to just say they were following the rule.
No, they had to demonstrate it over and over, chipping away at that deep structural fear.
They're marched towards a building with a red cross on it.
And for Margaret, that symbol sparks immediate panic. The stories back home were of medical experiments, of torture and captivity. She's expecting a room of total degradation.
But that's not what she finds.
Not at all. The place is impossibly clean. White walls, proper medical equipment, American nurses in starched, clean uniforms moving with this calm efficiency. They're just doing standard sanitary procedure, checking for lice, injuries. It's all very professional.
And then they get to what they call the dowsing room. This is where Margaret thinks the real humiliation will begin.
Yes, she's expecting rough guards to be stripped, hosed down like an animal. This is where that promise of being treated like animals would finally come true.
But instead of guards,
it's a middle-aged American civilian woman. She shows no real emotion, just hands Margaret a bar of soap.
and it's real soap.
It is. Not the gritty, harsh wartime substitute they'd been using. This was smooth, white, and when Margaret smelled it, it smelled like flowers. Lavender.
Such a small detail, but so powerful.
Incredibly powerful. The woman just says, in broken German, showers are hot, take your time. Clean clothes on the bench. That simple sequence, lavender soap, hot water, privacy, it was one of the most effective psychological weapons imaginable.
And Margaret starts crying in the shower.
Uncontrollably. And it wasn't just relief. It was the complete shattering of her deepest survival mechanism. For years, her body and her mind had been trained to expect brutality, to brace for degradation, and when the enemy provides basic human dignity instead, that entire defensive wall just collapses.
It's an overwhelming wave of unwanted grace.
That's a perfect way to put it. She comes out wrapped in a clean towel, and the clothes waiting for her aren't rags. They're simple, whole-work dresses that smell like fresh laundry.
Elsa comes out moments later in the same state.
Yes, and they just look at each other, and the realization is terrifying. They're treating us with dignity. If this is a trick, it's a trick based on kindness, which makes it the most baffling and dangerous kind of deception they could imagine.
And if the shower was an assault on their dignity, the first meal was an assault on their entire economic worldview.
The smell that had been torturing them was about to become real. Their march to the mess hall, still nervous, still convinced this is where the poison comes, or the humiliation.
But the meal they get is astonishing.
Not just filling, delicious. Mashed potatoes with a pat of real butter melting on top.
A thick slice of meatloaf.
Green beans, a piece of soft white bread, and the final shock, a cup of hot, steaming liquid that smelled bitter and sweet. Real coffee.
And you have to remember, they've been drinking roasted acorns.
Or chicory, or roasted barley. They'd forgotten what real coffee even tasted like. The bitterness, the caffeine. It was a memory from another lifetime.
Why the tears over the food?
Because it tasted real. The potatoes were creamy. The meatloaf was seasoned. That sudden switch from survival rations to genuine, abundant food, it triggered this hysterical reaction. Laughter and tears. It wasn't just eating. It was a sensory explosion confirming the enemy was operating in a world without scarcity.
But this is where the truly critical observation comes in. The intellectual part of it.
Yes. This is what we're calling the principle of equality. Elsa sees it first, then Margaret. The American soldiers, sitting at nearby tables, are eating the exact same food, the exact same portions.
They weren't being fed scraps.
No, they were being treated as equals in the mess line. And you have to understand how culturally jarring this was. In the Nazi system, your access to quality food was a direct reflection of your rank, your political loyalty, your racial standing.
A visible hierarchy.
The food hierarchy was the social hierarchy. Officers ate better than enlisted men. Party members ate better than civilians. And now they're watching the enemy, who they've been told is degenerate and inferior, operate on this ethos of equality.
It raises a terrifying question in Margaret's mind.
What kind of enemy feeds its prisoners the same as its own people? A true monster would exploit their power. They would hoard the good food. They would starve the captives. But these Americans weren't.
They were just following the rules.
And with a level of abundance that suggested it wasn't even a sacrifice for them to do so. Their physical reality warmth, cleanliness, nutrition was a direct functioning contradiction to the entire ideology they'd been raised in.
And the barracks continued the trend.
Bunk beds with actual real mattresses. Thin but real. Thick, clean wool blankets. Not just straw on a cold floor.
Then the final, almost cruel irony.
The small cast iron stove. A guard shows them how to use it and promises, it gets cold here in winter, you will need heat.
That simple promise, you will need heat. The devastation of that must have been immense.
It's impossible to overstate. Margaret's family is in Bremen, a city being leveled by Allied bombs. She knows her mother is in a cellar, probably burning furniture just to stay warm. And here, the nation that is bombing her city is providing coal and heat for her, their captive enemy. The entire narrative was being turned upside down.
The physical comfort was creating a profound psychological crisis.
Yes, and that crisis was about to get much, much worse. The body was comfortable, but the mind was beginning to struggle with this profound moral inconsistency.
And the trigger for that was a letter from home. It arrives about 3 weeks after they get to the camp.
Yes, the Americans, following the rules, allowed mail. And Margaret gets her first letter from her mother in Bremen.
And it's not good news.
It's a catalog of suffering. The letter details the unvarnished truth of the German home front. Bremen is in ruins. Her mother is living in a cellar with 6 other families, surviving on rations that are shrinking by the day. No heat, no electricity, just cold and hunger.
While Margaret is safe, warm, and well-fed in a POW camp in Kansas.
The contrast is a physical blow, but it's the final line of the letter that is the most devastating indictment of the whole Nazi project.
What did it say?
Her mother writes, with what sounds like profound relief, "I am glad you are safe, my darling, wherever you are. It must be better than here."
Wow. A German mother, relieved that her daughter is a prisoner of the enemy.
Because the enemy was, empirically, a better provider and protector than her own government. The guilt for Margaret was instant. It was paralyzing. She had just eaten a full meal. She was warm. The food that had tasted like a miracle just hours before now tasted like ash.
She was a traitor just by being safe.
And this wasn't just her. This realization rippled through the barracks as other women got their letters. Elsa's brother was missing on the Eastern Front. Her sister had tuberculosis with no medicine. This collective shame, this moral contradiction was suffocating.
Yet the system providing their comfort just kept on functioning.
Mandated by military discipline and international law, the women were assigned paid labor, working in the camp laundry.
And this is another key point. They were paid.
80 cents a day in American money, as required by the Geneva Convention, which gave them a small measure of financial autonomy.
They could buy things at the camp canteen.
Soap, cigarettes, stationery, and most powerfully, chocolate.
The Hershey bar.
The Hershey bar. The sources describe Margaret just standing there, staring at the brown wrapper. She hadn't tasted real chocolate in 4 years. When she finally ate it, the sweetness was almost painful. It was rich, creamy. It was a taste of a pre-war life, a taste of forbidden luxury.
Purchased with her enemy's money.
Which she earned by washing her enemy's clothes. It just drove home the point that the Reich was failing its own people through systemic scarcity, while the enemy was providing not just necessities, but even capital and indulgence.
And at the same time, the image of the monstrous enemy was being eroded by just casual human interaction.
Yes. The ideological barrier started to break down. They saw the guards. They weren't automatons. They were just guys chewing gum, listening to baseball on the radio, making jokes. They looked tired and professional and like they just wanted to be home.
And then there was Sergeant Morrison.
An older guard, maybe in his 40s. He comes up to Margaret one morning while she's hanging laundry. He's not aggressive, just weary. And he offers her a cigarette.
So they just stand there sharing a smoke.
2 people separated by a fence and a world war. He tells her he has a daughter about her age. They talk about their lives, not the war. And then he says something she never forgot.
What was it?
He just quietly says, "This war is stupid. You are young, you should not be here."
A soldier criticizing the war to an enemy prisoner.
And without any fear of consequence. In Germany, that statement would mean a one-way trip to a Gestapo cell, or worse. But here, it was just a man expressing a basic human truth. It was proof of a fundamental freedom she just couldn't comprehend.
There were others too. Guard Tommy.
Yeah, he was friendly, taught them simple English phrases, and he brought them American magazines. Life, the Saturday Evening Post.
And what did they see in those?
Well, they saw soldiers, sure, but mostly they saw the ads. Page after page of overwhelming American abundance. Cars, washing machines, tables piled high with food, smiling families. It was like looking into another universe, a nation that was whole, vibrant, and untouched by the destruction that had shattered their world.
It wasn't the American army that was winning the psychological war.
It was the American washing machine. It was proof of a functioning society with resources to burn.
And the humanizing didn't stop at the camp's fence.
No. One Sunday, a group of local civilian women, church ladies, came to the camp with donations. Blankets, books, and hand-knitted wool socks for the German prisoners for the winter.
Margaret was given a pair of socks.
by an older woman who just smiled and said in broken German, "For winter, God bless you, dear."
But again, she's reduced to tears.
Of course. An enemy woman, a grandmother, had spent her time and her resources knitting something specifically for her, a German soldier. That simple, unnecessary act of compassion was more destructive to her ideology than any bomb could be.
So back in the barracks, this must have led to some intense debates.
Oh, absolutely. The internal war erupted after lights out. Some women, the true believers, they clung to the official narrative. This is psychological warfare. They're trying to break our spirits by feeding us.
But that argument starts to sound pretty hollow.
Right, and one of the women, a former school teacher, she puts it perfectly. She says, "What kind of warfare is that? If they wanted to break our spirits, they would starve us. Maybe," she says, "maybe we are remembering who we are supposed to be. Human beings."
And Margaret is just trapped in the middle of this.
She is. She's facing two terrifying truths. The first is the guilt of her own safety versus her mother's suffering. And the second, even more terrifying thought. What if everything she was told was wrong?
What if they were the villains?
Exactly. The cruel enemies gave them bread and kindness. The heroic victim nation led them to ruin. That thought was too painful to fully embrace, but it was there, hovering over every meal, every warm night.
And this slow, corrosive process of de-indoctrination is about to come to a brutal, definitive climax.
Yes. Late November, the crisis point that would test everything they had seen and felt.
Elsa collapses in the laundry.
She'd been complaining of stomach pain, trying to work through it, but then she just drops. She's gray, sweating. It's clearly a ruptured appendix with peritonitis, a death sentence in her experience.
And this is where all that theory crashes into hard reality. Margaret's reaction is pure ideology.
Completely. Her training kicks in. The enemy would never waste critical medicine or a surgeon's time on a German prisoner. She's a burden. It would be faster, easier, and therefore, in her mind, more merciful to just dispose of the problem.
Which leads to her running to the guard and making that plea, "My friend dying, shoot her mercy, please."
It's a testament to the sheer depth of the programming. The only act of kindness she could conceive of from an enemy was a quick death.
But the American Guard system, his training, is focused on the exact opposite.
His training is to save life, not take it. He's shocked by the request, not the collapse. And his response is immediate professional mobilization of medical care. The prisoner becomes the priority.
He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't call a superior.
He calls for an ambulance. The medical alert sounds. Medics are at the laundry in less than 3 minutes, moving with this urgent, practiced efficiency. The speed of the response was the first proof. They weren't going to let her die, and they weren't going to shoot her. They were going to fight for her.
Margaret gets to go with her in the ambulance.
Yes, escorted by a young guard named Davis. And in the back of the ambulance, Elsa, barely conscious, she whispers the question that sums up their entire struggle. Will they help me? Why would they?
And Margaret's answer is the dawning of this new, terrifying reality.
She holds her friend's hand and says, "I do not know, but they are trying. That admission is everything. The enemy is trying to save them."
At the hospital in town, the speed is breathtaking.
Elsa is rushed straight to surgery. The head surgeon, an older man, confirms it's as bad as it looked. Ruptured appendix, peritonitis. It requires immediate, very delicate surgery.
And Margaret, still terrified, grabs his arm.
She begs him, pleading in this mix of German and English for him to save her friend. An enemy soldier pleading for the life of another enemy soldier to the men she was raised to see as monsters.
And the surgeon makes a promise.
He looks at her, sees the desperation, and he makes the moral promise that defines this entire story. He speaks in careful German, making sure she understands. "We will do everything we can. I promise."
And you have to analyze that promise. They were committing American time, American blood, American surgical expertise.
All precious wartime resources. To save one German POW, it wasn't necessary. It was an act of profound principle.
Margaret is left in the waiting room for 8 hours.
Just frozen.
Yeah.
Sitting there, realizing the magnitude of what was happening behind those doors. And the waiting room itself is part of her de-indoctrination. She's watching American families, worried fathers, tired mothers. She's seeing the utterly normal civilian face of America.
And then, a moment of simple compassion.
An American woman who's waiting for news on her own child walks over to Margaret, this girl in a prison uniform, and she offers her a sandwich and a cup of water.
No questions. No malice.
Just a shared moment of human anxiety. Offering food to your enemy's soldier. It just underlined the absurdity of the hatred she'd been taught.
Finally, after 8 hours, the surgeon comes out.
He's bloody, exhausted, weary. Margaret just lunges out of her seat.
And he gives her the news. She is alive. She pulled through.
The surgery was a success. They cleaned the infection. She was lucky, but she was alive because of the sustained effort of this American medical team. Margaret just collapses, weeping with relief.
And then the surgeon delivers the 5 words that are the ultimate intellectual bomb.
He pats her shoulder, and he speaks to her not as a prisoner, but as a person. He says, all lives have value.
And that's it. That's the moment.
That is the moment. That one statement from an enemy who just spent 8 hours fighting for the life of a German auxiliary was the definitive proof that everything the right had taught her was a lie. The entire Nazi state was built on the principle that some lives have value, and others are Lebenswertes, Leben life, unworthy of life.
And this act of radical operationalized mercy.
It was the ultimate weapon. They had the power to let Elsa die. They could have saved their resources, but they chose not to. They fought for 8 hours because of a profound moral commitment to the inherent worth of every human life, and that act of kindness shattered her certainty in a way no bomb ever could.
So Elsa spends the next 12 days recovering in that hospital.
And the treatment never wavers. Margaret visits every day. The nurses, like a young woman named Betty, treat Elsa with the same kindness they show every other patient. They chat about Betty's cat and broken German. It's just human.
Sustained, consistent kindness was the final proof.
It was. And on the 4th day, when Elsa is lucid, she delivers her final admission to Margaret. She just whispers, "We were lied to about everything. They are better than we were, better than the Reich."
That's a complete intellectual surrender.
But not to force, to moral superiority. And for Margaret, her gratitude and relief completely overwhelm any lingering political allegiance. Her friend is alive because the enemy adhered to a moral code that her own leaders had abandoned.
And the story of the 8-hour surgery becomes a legend in Camp Concordia.
It spreads like wildfire. The women had seen the bread and the soap, but this commitment to fight for a single life was the ultimate, undeniable proof. It became a turning point for so many of them.
And years later, Margaret would tell this story to her own children.
Yes. She would tell them about running to that guard post, begging for a merciful death for her friend. And she told them that the moment she knew, truly knew, that everything she had fought for was wrong.
It wasn't when Hitler died or when the cities fell.
No, it was when the Americans fought for 8 hours to save her enemy friend.
The lesson she learned was that the difference between civilization and barbarism isn't about the uniform you wear.
It's about how you treat the helpless, how you treat your enemies. Mercy, not violence, was what ultimately destroyed the certainty of her totalitarian worldview.
And the sources really drive this home, that mercy isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength, capable of dismantling indoctrination more completely than any military campaign.
The real test of a society isn't what it achieves on the battlefield. It's the principles that guide it in the operating theater.
That surgical room in Concordia, Kansas is a testament to that, to a profound moral clarity in a time of absolute chaos. The knowledge Margaret gained that day, that all lives have value, came at the price of her entire shattered worldview.
And so the question the story really leaves for you as you reflect on this hidden front of history is this. When you find yourself in a position of power over resources, over decisions, over the fates of other people, how do you choose to act?
Do you operate from necessity, or from that same principle? The principle that all lives have an intrinsic, immeasurable value. That is the knowledge that truly matters.